Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Ooley, and we're here for actually the last edition of the Forge of Freedom from the NRA Annual Meeting in Houston, Texas. And I'm joined here by Tom Kehoe from Project Appleseed. Tom, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Alex. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so you and I actually met for the first time yesterday. I was just cruising around the show floor for a little while yesterday, and I saw that Project Appleseed had a booth here at the NRA Annual Meeting in Houston. How's the meeting going for Project Appleseed? Has it been a decent meeting for you all?
It's going well. We come to the NRA show for a number of reasons. For one, we want to be able to just interact with the shooting community and spread the word about our mission and get people out to our shoots. But we're also always looking for industry partnerships, for new ranges where we can host our shoots, for good products that we can recommend to our shooters. And so we're moving in a lot of different directions at the convention.
Well, I'm glad you agreed to come on the show because while I'm vaguely familiar with Project Appleseed, I did know somebody who went to an Appleseed event and spoke very highly of it, but I'm not very well acquainted with it myself. So this show is as much for me as our listeners, but I was excited to see you all on the show floor and excited for the opportunity to get to chat with you. If you would, tell us a little bit just about the background, the history of Project Appleseed and what its mission is.
Sure. Project Appleseed is a 501c3 nonprofit educational foundation. There's not a whole lot of shooting groups that can get that classification. And what we do is we conduct shoots or have conducted shoots in all 50 states from Alaska to Hawaii to California to Florida. And we promote two things. One is we want people to return to being a nation of riflemen. The second thing that we want to do is we want people to reconnect with that heritage of the founding generation. Today, most people don't realize that today should be a sacred day in the history of the United States. April 19th, 1775, Lexington conquered when a group of basically ragtag farmers, craftsmen, and fishermen stood up to the mightiest military that the world had ever seen and kicked their butt 15 miles, conquer all the way back to Boston. And people don't understand the significance of that. In those days, they were all British citizens. There's the myth that Paul Revere went riding through the streets saying, the British are coming, the British are coming. Well, they were all British. That's the way they thought of themselves. What they actually said was something more like, the regulars are out, the regulars are out. But it was a death sentence. If you stood up to the British Army on that day, the only thing you could really look forward to was a gallows. You either won or you died. And yet, by some estimates, as many as 13,000 colonists turned out to support their neighbors, their communities, and to show the British that they weren't going to stand for confiscation of their firearms. And that's really what prompted the whole thing. The military commander of the colony, a man named Gage, had sent out troops to confiscate the firearms, powder and ball and whatever else was being held, to try and calm down the anti-British sentiment that was sweeping through the colonies. And it worked fairly well on several occasions. But on April 19th in Concord, Massachusetts, it failed horribly. So we say we are descended from dangerous men. And we don't mean that in an ugly way. To be a truly dangerous man, you actually have to be a good man to start with. It just means that you've drawn a line that you're not going to let anyone cross.
Yes.
And that's our heritage as Americans. The extraordinary thing about April 19th was people had this idea that they could rule themselves. They didn't need a king. They didn't need people across the sea to support them, that we could govern ourselves. John Adams said, you have to be able to separate the revolution from the Revolutionary War. He said, the Revolutionary War was fought for 8 years throughout colonies, in battlefields all over New England and the South. He said, but the revolution was won before the first shot was fired, because that revolution occurred in the hearts and minds of people who would become Americans.
Yeah.
And at Project Appleseed, We believe something that's kind of radically dangerous in these times. We believe that the things that hold us together as Americans, our combined heritage, are stronger than things that want to pull us apart into tribes. And at Project Appleseed, we're a friend to all and an enemy to none. We don't care what your religion is. We don't care what your political persuasion is. We believe that as Americans, we share a common, illustrious heritage, and that should hold us together and enable us to work together to make a better nation.
Yeah.
So when you come to an Appleseed, we're going to give you the finest program of field riflery that's available in the United States. But we're also going to tell you the history of April 19th, 1775, why that's important to all Americans. And we want people to be able to become more active in their communities. We don't care what you do, but we've had members inspired to go out and become members of their town councils, become mayors of their town, get on the school board. If you're not happy with the direction of the country, go out and change it. Be a responsible mayor.
Yeah. Well, this is why I was so excited to have you on today, because there's probably no other organization here at the NRA Annual Meeting that is more closely aligned with the Forge of Freedom and the idea behind that than Project Appleseed, because the idea is that that heritage is not passed on in the bloodline. It's passed on in the hearts and minds of people.
Exactly.
And through civic education, through continued responsibility, through stewardship of those rights and those responsibilities that are concomitant with those rights.
Exactly.
And I think Project Appleseed embodies that. And like you say, it's just sort of captures that Forge of Freedom sort of concept better than any other organization here. So I really appreciate that. So the way I see it then is that Project Appleseed has sort of, there's the civic component. You're teaching the history, you're teaching the heritage, you're also teaching the rights and responsibilities, and then the marksmanship itself. So it's not just about the gun, right? The gun is sort of the third component.
Exactly.
Right. So tell us a little bit about Project Appleseed, how it got started, right? So there's this sort of heritage that you want to carry on. Who started it? How to get started? And what does Project Appleseed do today?
So the program was started 21 years ago by a man named Jack Daly. And Jack is a unique man. He's charismatic. He's very intense. And he used to write a series of columns in the Shotgun News. He had a business called Fred's Rifle Stocks. And Fred became his nickname in the program, but Fred was actually the name of his dog. And so Fred used to write these columns about why it was important to preserve your liberty and to embrace your heritage as an American. And he started doing rifle shoots at his range in Ramseur, North Carolina. And he was doing them in conjunction with his business, which sold stocks for M14s. He had bought all kinds of surplus from the U.S. government. And so he was a huge fan of the M14, or they should call it the M1A, I guess. And he would do shoots at 400 yards, and he had knockdown targets. And while people were there, while they were stuck at the range, he'd start regaling them with stories about the American Revolution and why so many people were willing to put their lives on the line in the cause of liberty. And that's how the whole program evolved. Those shoots became so popular at his range that he took his program on the road and became a nonprofit and started traveling around the country running these shoots. And we refer to those days as the hairy-legged men shoots, because mostly he was dealing with old veterans, people who already had 30 caliber rifles. And it was not just a business, it was a crusade. And as he went along, he started getting other people involved in the program. He's a very inspiring guy. And so there were people who wanted to join him on the road, and the program just kind of rolled out of that. The program has evolved a lot in the last 20 years. We've put, I think, about 200,000 people through the program at this point. And these days, the most common shoots we do are a 25-meter program where the targets are scaled as if they're shooting at 100, 200, 300, and 400 yards. And the reason we do that is, well, first of all, it's a whole lot faster to run a shoot where you don't have to keep walking 400 yards downrange to check the targets. But there's very, very few places in the country where you can actually run a 400-yard shoot. There are a whole lot more places where you can do it at 25 meters. And so, as I said, we've got ranges all over the country. And we've got instructor cadres. We've got about 700 instructors right now. And becoming an Appleseed instructor is no small endeavor. To get into the instruction program, you have to have attended a couple of our shoots and be able to shoot an expert score on what we call the Appleseed qualification test, which is a timed program of fire from 3 different positions. And there's a rapid fire stage and a slow accuracy stage, and we shoot from prone, standing, and sitting or kneeling position. And we do some of those with 22 caliber rifles, and we do some of those with 30 caliber other center fires. AR-15s are the most popular today. And we've also evolved to the point where we still do, we call them cold distance shoots or known distance shoots out at 400 yards. And part of the point of that is we teach people what works at 25 meters works at 400. If you can get it down right, if you can shoot score on the AQT, then you can do it on a life-size target at 400 yards. So first you have to become an expert qualification, and then you get entered. If we think you have the personality for it, then we'll invite you to join the program. And it's about 160 hours on average, hands-on training to get that coveted red hat. And you go through a whole series of tests, both on paper and practical shooting. And so every one of our instructors, red hats, are absolute experts, not just with the rifle itself, but in the course of fire. And in addition to telling histories of April 19th, 1775, and other stories about the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
So these days we have the 25-meter program. We have the known distance program at 400. We do a rimfire known distance, which goes typically around 200 yards. And within the last few years, we've been developing a pistol program as well. And the reason we wanted to get the pistol program up and going is because so many Americans are buying pistols. And because in a whole lot of parts of the country, you can't even find a 25-meter range, but you can find a 50-foot indoor range. So the pistol program, unlike most pistol programs out there, is all about shooting rapidly and accurately. And by the time you finish one of our pistol shoots, the goal is to get you ready to actually take a draw and fire class. And we hope to develop one of those on our own in the next couple of years as well.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that this was sort of the hairy leg club.
Well, it was in those days.
In those days, right? It's not that anymore.
It's not
obviously.
that anymore.
What is the target audience for these Project Appleseed shoots?
We're trying to get families involved. We get a whole lot of folks on the line, very non-traditional shooters these days. 20 years ago, you'd have guys in fatigues and military caps on. And today you're as likely to see moms in yoga pants on our line, who come out and bring 2 or 3 kids with them. Now pistol shoots aren't like that, obviously, because there's other requirements there. But we're definitely trying to embrace a much wider audience. In the early days, we were basically dealing with low-hanging fruit. There was people who had served in the military, who had been hunting all their lives, and they were thirsty for a program that gave them greater mastery over their firearm. Today, we get a lot of very, very new shooters, and we've adapted to that. We say that the AS in Appleseed stands for Always Safe. And with 200,000 people gone through the program, we've never actually had anyone injured by a firearm on our lines. And so we're very safety conscious, whether it's a rifle program or a pistol program. And we're open to all. We do a lot of church groups. We do a lot of homeschooling groups coming in. We've done it for veterans. We've actually trained military units going out to the sandbox. So we're a friend to all and an enemy to none. And we think things that hold us together as Americans are far more important than the things that want to tear us apart and try us.
Yeah. So if somebody is interested in one of these Appleseed events, where should they go to find out more information?
Well, if they're here at the NRA show, they can stop by our booth. but there's a website, appleseedinfo.org.
Okay.
And there you can see where our shoots are all scheduled. There are states where we have a whole lot more shoots scheduled than some others. We do a whole lot in Florida. We do a whole lot in the southern states. Over the years, it's become increasingly more difficult to do them in some states, but we're fighting back. It's one of the reasons, actually, that we got the pistol program going is because it's actually easier to run in a whole lot of the more industrialized states than it is an outdoor 25-meter event.
Yeah, makes sense. So Appleseed, I'm going to make sure I get this right. Appleseedinfo.org.
Correct.
And there they can find out what programs you have available.
Exactly.
What I know on the website, I was looking at it earlier before the show. You list all the states where you have events, where you have, and I think a link to the director or the person who's in charge of that particular state. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So perfectly easy to get in touch with somebody who knows more about what's going on in that particular state.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's important to know everyone in our program, except for our IT folks, are volunteers.
Okay.
I've been doing this I'm the chairman of the board, and I've been doing that for about 13 years, I think.
Okay.
And I was a shoot boss for a couple of years before that, running shoots down in Florida where I live. But everyone is volunteer, and we will put up our instructors against anyone trained by any group.
I should have asked you this at the beginning, but how did you get involved with Project Appleseed?
So I was chief instructor at my local gun club down in Florida, and my local gun club has 17 ranges and 4,000 members, and so we're very, very active. And Project Appleseed came in and said, we need to be able to run shoots in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Will you host us? And my response was, what the hell is Project Appleseed? And so I made a deal with the other board members. I said, well, let's let them run a shoot here. I'll go out. I'll run the shoot. Well, I won't run it. I'll shoot it, and I'll come back with a report on it. And I had been a competitive shooter back when I was a teenager, and I've got a bunch of certifications to teach other kinds of classes. And by the end of the weekend, I had shot the expert score several times on the target. And the guy was wearing the shoot who basically put his arm around me and said, "You're our boy. We need you in the program."
There you go. And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah.
So again, appleseedinfo.org for more information. But if somebody signs up for an Appleseed event, what should they expect at that event? How does the event progress? What should they?
So typically, we start out in the morning explaining who we are, and we start by telling what we call the first strike of the match. People don't realize that there were actually several armed conflicts on April 19th, 1775. The first was essentially a massacre on Lexington Green when the British opened fire on a bunch of militiamen who were literally walking away, and they were shot in the back. And that wasn't supposed to happen. That was undisciplined troops responsible for that. And sometime later, when the British were in the town of Concord, there was a second conflict when the local militia thought the British were murdering down the city. They accidentally started a fire, and the British troops actually turned around and put out the fire. They saw the smoke coming out of Concord, and they advanced on some kind of vanguard of the British forces and sent the British running. But then it stopped again, and it didn't actually flare out in full until the British left the town of Concord and were walking down what we call Battle Road today, and their troops, again, without order, turned around and fired on the militia behind them. And they didn't realize they were surrounded on all sides, and it was a massacre from that point down. The British suffered 15% casualty rate. You know, you've heard the term decimated.
Mm-hmm.
That means that you've reduced the military force by 10%. Well, the British were reduced by 15%,
Wow.
which is a heck of a toll. And the colonists suffered casualties of about 2%. And the difference was that the British were not trained to deliver accurate, disciplined fire. Battlefield techniques in those days were all about volley shooting, and they didn't really even have sights on their guns. The colonists, on the other hand, they used those muzzle loaders to put meat on the table every day. And so they were very, very accurate. And the perception of the British in that one day changed entirely. Before that, Lord Hugh Earl Percy, had told the king, just give me a few men and we'll go up and down the length of the colonies and we'll gild all the men and they won't even complain about it. At the end of the day, Percy had written that anyone who thinks that this is an undisciplined rabble is sadly mistaken. They have men amongst them who know very well what they were about. And because of orders that Percy had issued that day, he was actually driven out of the colonies because the colonists put a price on his head.
Yeah. So you start out with an introduction to the Appleseed, Project Appleseed.
So we start out with an introduction. We start telling the story of April 19th. We break it in 3 pieces, 3 strikes. Basically, Lexington Green, Concord, and then the final battle. And then we start doing dry fire, and we teach people how to use a sling for accuracy, and that's something that most people don't do anymore. But using a sling to steady it actually changed the course of the Olympics back in the 20s and gave Americans dominance over the shooting sports. So it's very important to learn how to shoot with a sling. And we go down from there. We teach dry fire. We have a very structured program. We teach steady hold factors, how to shoot from different positions. And we teach it incrementally and it builds. Everything that you learn builds on the next lesson. And typically we end up shooting anywhere from 300 to 500 rounds from the weekend.
Okay.
We do a lot of dry firing, which is a great technique. And most people just never learn that art. It's a separate art. By the end of Saturday, we try to shoot the first AQT or Appleseed qualification test. And again, it's a timed test of marksmanship from standing, sitting, and prone, and both rapid fire prone and slow fire accurate prone.
So are most of these events 2-day events? Or?
Most of them, yeah. Most of them are 2-day events. We do single day events, and we do week-long events we call riflemen's boot camps, which are a blast. If you want to become an instructor, a rifleman's boot camp is a great way to get an edge up on that. And so we have a wide variety of programs that are tailored to the amount of time people have to commit to it.
And I assume if you're coming as a family with children or whatever age group is participating, do they bring any equipment at all, or is all the equipment provided as part of the?
We tell them exactly what they need to bring.
Okay.
And that's on our website, and it's in an introductory letter that we send out to them, an email that we send out. But it's also very common that we have loaner rifles available. A lot of people are not very good at following directions, and you'll tell them bring a rifle in this configuration, and they'll bring something other than that, and shoot what run you run. That's what we're all about. But we'll make available rifles that are set up properly for the particular program of instruction. And so, yeah, we do a lot of that kind of loaner thing.
And what's the cost for the typical Appleseed shoot?
A 2-day, we're probably the best value in marksmanship instruction in the country. 2-day rifle shoot is typically $80.
Okay.
Which is about half the cost of what we would pay for most single-day programs these days.
At least half the cost.
Yeah.
Barely half the cost.
Yeah.
And that's for the 2-day typically.
That's for the 2-day call.
Okay.
Right.
Fantastic.
And then for the boot camps and some of the others, it depends upon what other fees we have to deal with for the ranges and that sort of thing.
Okay. What's sort of the minimum age? Do you have a minimum age, or?
Well, we get a lot of young folks on the line.
Yeah.
And their parents are a better judge of their maturity than we are. We've certainly had kids as young as 7 or 8 on our lines.
Okay.
And they have limited attention spans. That's just part of being 7 or 8.
Sure.
And so we have people that are working with them and making sure that they're not becoming exhausted or unsafe. And so we work closely with a lot of those. And we also do shoots for Boy Scouts, homeschooling groups. We work with Trail Life Scouts a lot. So we've got a lot of experience dealing with younger folks. But we have folks on our lines that range from 8 to 80. We've done special shoots for folks with disabilities. We've had folks with disabilities on all of our regular shoots. people shooting from wheelchairs, or we make other accommodations for them. We used to have a lady who came to a bunch of shoots that I ran down in the Melbourne, Florida area, and she was she was missing most of her lower legs, and she shot from a wheelchair, and damn, she rocked.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, once again, I want to mention the website again. It's appleseedinfo.org. And Tom Kehoe, again, chairman of the Appleseed Board of Directors. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you think we need to let the viewers know about, just as an introduction to the Project Appleseed?
I think a lot of folks say to themselves, I bought this gun and I need to get some training with it, but I don't want to go out and train with those people. Well, there are none of those people at Project Appleseed. We're all Americans. Everyone's welcome at our shoots. We don't care what your skin color is. We don't care what religion you are. We don't care what your political persuasion is. We don't allow discussion of modern politics at our shoots. The only politics you'll hear about is what was going on in colonies 250 years ago, and why it's important to connect with your heritage as an American, but with your shooting heritage and that heritage of liberty.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure. We appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. The other thing too, I mentioned this in this sort of parallel between our mission and the message we're trying to spread, is that the Project Appleseed, I assume that there's sort of an imagery there, right? That our rights and our liberties are preserved by planting one seed at a time.
Exactly.
By having one more person with the civic knowledge, the civic duty, the responsibility, and the marksmanship to carry on our rights for generations to come. Well, and that's, I think, an honorable mission, and I appreciate the work that you do.
Well, I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
It's a shame. I grew up in an area where the Revolutionary War was fought. Right down the street from the house I grew up in was Washington Valley Road, and there was an old inn there where Washington had stayed during the one of the years of the Revolution, and yet even when I was a kid, which was a long, long time ago, they didn't teach you a whole lot about that history in school, and today they teach you less of it. But it's important. It's what connects us as Americans. There's a great book that our kind of history reference for that is Paul Revere's Ride.
Okay.
And we sell that book in our store. The fellow who wrote it won a Pulitzer Prize for other history writing, a famous history professor. And it's worth reading that book. It reads like a novel. It's not stuffy or boring.
I'll try to link to that in the show notes.
Cool.
Are there any other resources that you'd recommend? Actually, I'm of course going to link to Project Appleseed's website and the book that you referenced. Anything else you'd recommend, I'm happy to link to in the show notes.
The city of Boston has wonderful resources on Battle Road, and all of those sites that we were talking about are preserved historical landscapes today, and they do tours up and down there and explain why that's all so important to our history of our country and our heritage as Americans.
Okay. Well, thanks again.
My pleasure.
Tom, I appreciate you being here. It was just a coincidence that we happened to record this on April 19th, 2026.
It's a happy coincidence. Like I said, this should be a sacred day for everyone in America.
I agree. And if you don't mind, I'm actually going to read I found this on on social media this morning, just a short tidbit. You gave a great summation of the shot heard around the world at the beginning of our conversation, but I want to end with it as well.
Sure.
April 19th, 1775, 77 American militiamen faced 700 British regulars on Lexington Green at sunrise. 8 were killed. The British marched on to Concord. By noon, they were in full retreat. Colonial militiamen lined every stone wall and hedgerow for 17 miles. The British lost 273 men, killed, wounded, or missing. The siege of Boston began that night. The British evacuated Massachusetts 11 months later and never returned. The men on Lexington Green were not yet citizens of a free country. They were farmers standing in a field at sunrise. They started something that changed the world 251 years ago today. So
it's excellent.
Yeah.
There's this wonderful story that it's very well documented. But partially through that afternoon, quite a number of British soldiers defected. They saw an opportunity. They ran, and and they looked for someone to turn themselves into. And there was this old lady known as Mother Bathrick, who was in her 80s, and she was out picking dandelion greens for her dinner. And a couple of these redcoats ran up to her, threw their guns down her feet, and said, "We surrender, we surrender." And she dropped her greens, picked up one of the muskets, and walked back to the local town she was from, and turned them in there. And this became a famous story, and became quite the sensation back in the House of Lords in Britain. And one of the lords said to the king, "If an 80-year-old colonial woman can take 4 British redcoats prisoner, how many troops do we need to subdue all of the 14 colonies?" And but it was that spirit, you know, that just inflamed people in those days. And I think we'd be a better nation if we could get back to that.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, Project Appleseed, I think, is doing a major part in trying to return to that mentality. So thank you for all that you do, and thanks for joining the show.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to help us spread the message of freedom. As always, you can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, X, and on all the most popular podcast streaming platforms. Thanks again to Beretta Holding for sponsoring the Voices of the Second Amendment here at the NRA Annual Meeting in Houston, Texas. And thanks again to Project Appleseed. Until next time, everybody, remember, you are the forge of freedom.